The warriors return. The imperial palace stood against the crimson sky of Volta Prime, its crystalline spires catching the light of 3 setting suns. Princess Lyra walked through the Hall of Conquerors, her steps echoing across polished floors that reflected the faces of warriors carved into the walls. Each face represented a champion who had defended the Voltaran Empire across centuries of conflict. And today, one more would be added to their ranks. The war was over. After 12 brutal years, the Kraven horde had finally been pushed back beyond the outer rim. Billions had perished. Entire worlds had been reduced to ash and memory. The cost had been unthinkable, yet somehow, impossibly, the alliance of human and alien forces had prevailed. And at the center of that victory stood one human soldier whose tactical brilliance and combat prowess had turned the tide. When all seemed lost, Lyra had been 14 when the war began, a girl more interested in ancient literature than military strategy. She remembered the day the Kraven ships darkened their skies, the way her father's face had hardened as he received reports of colony after colony going silent. She remembered being rushed to the underground bunkers. Separated from everything she had known, she also remembered a boy they had met during a diplomatic visit to Earth, back when such visits were ceremonial affairs filled with banquets and carefully rehearsed speeches. While the adults discussed trade agreements and cultural exchanges, she had slipped away from her handlers and found herself in a public library. There, bent over a physical book about ancient civilizations, sat a thin human child with dark hair and intense eyes that seemed too old for his face. His name was simple, easy to pronounce even with her Valteran accent, Lucas. He had looked up at her without fear, without the artificial politeness that usually greeted her royal status. Instead, he had asked if she wanted to see something interesting, then showed her passages about the Library of Alexandria, about lost knowledge and the tragedy of forgotten wisdom. They had spent 3 days together during that visit, stealing moments between official functions. He taught her about Earth's history, about humans who had dreamed of the stars long before they could reach them. She taught him about Valteran poetry, about the concept of Kelmer, a word that meant the bittersweet beauty of temporary things. On the last day, before her ship departed, he had given her a paper book, a real one, bound in leather. Inside, he had written a single sentence in careful Valteran script: "May you find Kelmer in all things." The war had erupted 2 years later, and that childhood friendship became just another casualty of cosmic violence. Now, General Marcus, the human military liaison, stood beside her in the Hall of Conquerors. The old soldier had seen more battles than most people had seen sunrises, and his face bore the weight of each one. "The ceremony will begin shortly, Your Highness," he said, his voice carrying that perpetual gravel of someone who had shouted too many orders across too many battlefields. "Tell me about him," Lyra said. She had read the reports, watched the tactical breakdowns, studied the battles of the Callan Nebula and the Last Stand at Proxima Gate. But reports were sterile things. All numbers and outcomes, devoid of the person beneath the achievements. Marcus considered his words carefully. "He's brilliant, that's without question. But it's not just intelligence. He sees patterns where others see chaos. In the Battle of Broken Stars, when we were surrounded on 4 sides by Kraven dreadnoughts, he noticed they were using a modified Tranther formation. Most commanders wouldn't have recognized it, but he did. He also recognized its weakness, a gap in coverage that appears for exactly 7 seconds during their coordination cycle. He exploited it and turned certain defeat into our greatest victory." "He sounds more like a machine than a man," Lyra observed. "That's what I thought too, at first," Marcus admitted. "But then you see him with the wounded, or talking to soldiers before a battle. He remembers names, personal details, the things that matter to people. He reads constantly, everything from military history to poetry. The troops would follow him into the void itself, not because he's cold and calculating, but because he genuinely cares whether they make it home. Something in those words tugged at Lyra's memory. But before she could pursue the thought, trumpets sounded. The ceremony was beginning. The hall of conquerors filled with dignitaries from 100 worlds. The emperor himself, Lyra's father, stood at the central dais, his ceremonial armor gleaming with the symbols of 17 conquered nations. The victorious fleet commanders entered in formation, each one a legend in their own right. And at their center, walking with quiet confidence, came the human who had orchestrated it all. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. He was taller now, his frame filled out with muscle, earned through combat and hardship. His face bore scars, 3 parallel lines across his left cheek, and his eyes held depths of sorrow that no childhood gaze should ever acquire. But the dark hair, the way he held himself, the quiet intelligence in his expression, these things remained untouched by time and war. That Lucas, her childhood friend, had become the savior of civilizations. The ceremony proceeded with rigid formality. Her father spoke of sacrifice and courage, of the debt all free peoples owed to those who had fought. He bestowed the Star of Valter, the highest military honor, upon Lucas's chest. Throughout it all, Lucas maintained perfect military bearing, his responses crisp and appropriate. But Lyra noticed his eyes scanning the crowd, and when they found her, something shifted in his expression, that recognition, that the formal reception that followed was a torture of protocol and procedure. Lyra greeted ambassadors, accepted congratulations, played her role as the perfect princess. But she tracked Lucas across the room, watched him navigate conversations with the same tactical precision he presumably used in battle. He was polite but not warm, respectful but not engaged. He seemed to be enduring rather than celebrating. Finally, as the evening stretched toward night, she found him alone on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The 3 moons of Valter Prime hung low in the sky, painting everything in shades of silver and blue. "The gardens have changed since you were here last," she said quietly. Approaching his side, Lucas didn't startle. He simply turned and looked at her with those 2 old eyes. "Your Highness," he said formally, bowing slightly. "We're alone, Lucas," she said softly. "You don't need to pretend." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, the rigid military mask cracked. "I wasn't sure you'd remember," he admitted. "Remember?" Lyra felt something break inside her chest. "Lucas, you gave me a book. I've read it 100 times. The pages are falling out from use." He closed his eyes. "I thought you would have forgotten, moved on. That was a different life, for different people." "The war changed us," Lyra agreed. "But it didn't erase us, didn't it?" His voice carried an edge of bitterness. "I've killed millions, Lyra. Millions. Yes, they were the enemy. Yes, it was necessary. But their blood is still on my hands. The boy who gave you that book about ancient libraries is gone. He died somewhere between the Helios massacre and watching my entire battalion burn at Ragnarok Station." Lyra stepped closer. "That boy cared about knowledge, about preserving beautiful things in a harsh universe. The man I see now saved trillions by stopping an enemy that would have destroyed everything. That's not a betrayal of who you were, Lucas. That's the fullest expression of it." "You don't understand," he said quietly. "I've become the thing I used to fear. A weapon. A tool for destruction, however necessary it might have been." "Then let me show you something," Lyra said. She pulled a small device from her gown and activated it. A holographic image appeared between them, showing a massive structure of crystal and light. "This is the Memorial Library of the Fallen. We're building it on Sanctuary, the first world you liberated from the Kraven. It will hold the names of every person who died in the war, along with their stories, their art, their contributions to civilization. It will also hold the history of the war itself, so that future generations never forget what was lost and what was saved. She looked at him intently. You once told me about the Library of Alexandria, about the tragedy of forgotten knowledge. You've spent 12 years preventing a much greater tragedy. You didn't just destroy, Lucas. You preserved. Every world that still exists, every child who will grow up free, every book that will be written, every song that will be sung, they exist because of what you did. Lucas stared at the hologram, and for the first time since entering the palace, his expression softened. You're building a library, he said, something like wonder in his voice. We're building it, Lara corrected. I'm in charge of the Cultural Restoration Project, and I want you to help me, not as a general or a warrior, but as someone who understands what we're trying to preserve. I'm a soldier, he protested weakly. You're a reader, Lyra countered. You're someone who gave a lonely alien princess a book about human dreams. You're someone who cares about more than tactics and victory. Don't let the war take that from you too. They stood together in the moonlight, two people separated by biology and culture and the weight of terrible history, yet connected by something that had survived childhood and war and the vast indifference of space. I still have it, Lucas said finally. Your gift. Lyra blinked. What gift? The poem you wrote for me, that L.